Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement and lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
Niki, welcome to Lawyers Who Learn. I am really excited because I don't think we've actually had a longer conversation than a few minutes in all the times we've known each other. So I'm excited to dive deeper with you today. Is that correct? Or do you feel the same way?
I think so. I think I recall coming out to your offices at some point, probably more than 10 years ago, a long
Yeah.
time ago when I was in New York City at some point. But yeah, I don't think we've really touched base in a long time.
But I'm a huge fan and I read your newsletter and I see your posts and I see all that you're doing. So in my mind, I've had more than that, but I certainly know what's going on. And what I was going to do, this is Lawyers Who Learn. So this is about how you've learned and grown throughout your career. And it was started because only a very small percentage of your learning happens in a CLE course. The rest happens in your practice. And so the goal was to uncover that in some of these episodes. But I'd like to do my guests a favor. I like to explore new areas. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes to share your timeline. So we don't have to necessarily dive into every area and to save you that energy from having to repeat it. I know you say it a lot. So tell me if I miss anything here, but you started in the 90s working in criminal law, and then you switched to civil law in the late 90s, early 2000s. You took off to when you had a daughter. And then when you came back, you started doing contract work. Actually, you were of counsel for DWI firm. 2005 was where the big change happened. You started writing. If I'm pronouncing this correctly, I actually can't even read my handwriting. Sui Generis, is that what it was called? And it was a New York law blog. And from there, like the writing started taking off. You started writing for the Daily Record, for bar associations. And I think either 2010 or 2012, somewhere in that early area, you had reached out to Carolyn Elephant, and because she was big in the space and she was actually writing a book on social media and she needed help. And you guys decided to partner on that. And that was your first big collaboration in publishing that book. And then you've published more books since then. And then the next big shift for you was in 2012 at one of the legal tech conferences. You were walking by the MyCase booth and you probably showed your magic. And they're like, oh my God, we need her help. And I didn't realize until I was doing some research on this, I didn't realize you were the third employee of MyCase as their evangelist. I think that's what the title was at the time. And then from 2012 to now, MyCase has gone through a lot of transitions, acquisitions, and reacquisitions. But today it's owned by Affinity Pay, which also owns LawPay. And two other really cool things that I learned in my research of doing this for you, which is why I do this, so I can force myself to learn more about somebody, is even though I see your LinkedIn every day, I don't even look at it. I didn't realize until I saw that you have over 220,000 followers on LinkedIn. One of the reasons you mentioned, and certainly I want to dive into this, is LinkedIn reached out to you one time. We're like, oh, we're launching a mobile app or something. You're like, sure, let's do it. And that was really helpful. And the other thing, again, didn't realize this either, 27,000 almost subscribers to your newsletter. And then also you do the 3:00 calls every Friday with legal tech writers. Or what do you say it?
Journalists, I would say.
Journalists, thank you. That was an easy one. And I know Bamba Broshi does that. And every so often I'm able to tune in and I love doing that. So anything that I was way off with or missed, or does that sum it up pretty?
That was super close. There were one or two little things. The only big thing I would call out is I was employee number one. It was the three founders and then me with MyCase. But everything else, that was pretty impressive. That was a pretty deep overview. A few other little things in there, but they're
yeah. Chat. I did watch 2 podcasts and prep for this, which was fun to do. I really enjoyed the content one because that was in your most recent newsletter. Really good interview. And I learned a lot too about newsletters and LinkedIn. Where I'm going to start with this interview, because you speak so often, I want to ask this question to see where it goes. When you think about your learning journey and where you've evolved, is there something that you wish you talked about more, or people asked you more questions about, versus just essentially going through your bio and then talking about AI and all these things? There's something that comes to mind when I say that maybe we can just take that direction today. And if not, that's okay too. But I just love to see where that goes.
I wish that when I had been writing about cloud computing and talking about cloud computing, I'd been asked about that more because I'm a woman and I'd written a book on social media, people always want to ask me about either work-life balance or back then social media and how did I use social media and marketing. And I think it was that there was, and I wrote a book on cloud computing, but I feel like I didn't get asked about that nearly as much, didn't get asked to speak about that nearly as much as I did social media and now AI. And I feel like maybe because I've been in the business for so long and covering these topics for so long, and because there's a hunger for information about AI, it's been different with AI. But I do wish that there'd been more of a focus on, I guess, my knowledge of the cloud and my book on the cloud and my coverage of it. And there just never had been.
That's super interesting because even in my run through, I literally had like cloud computing on here, but I didn't even mention it. And I think I mentioned one book and not the second. And so just to dive into that, just to ask the question, why do you wish you had talked about it more?
Because I started writing about the cloud in 2000, and I want to say 2007 was the first time I wrote about it. I covered the legal tech industry. I covered the cloud providers as they came out. There were not very many. I wrote a book on it in 2012 that almost didn't get published because I feel like there was so much pushback on the back end of the ABA, because people thought in 2012 even that it was blasphemy to suggest that the cloud was secure, that lawyers should use it, that it had significant benefits in many ways for most small firm and even large firm lawyers than premises based. And now, fast forward, most people are saying, most security experts, it's far more secure for lawyers than premises based at this stage. And I've been saying that all along, but it was really considered blasphemous. And I think that they thought that I was encouraging lawyers to do things that they shouldn't be doing. I'm not really sure, but I think between that and also just, I think it's the fact that I was a woman and I was talking about a very tech function oriented thing, perhaps without tech background training.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a good sort of segue into learning. How did you become an expert in cloud computing from from the background where you started? Is it literally just like going online and reading articles? Take us through that, because I think that's where a lot of people and attorneys struggle right now. It's like we're so busy in our day jobs that it's hard to figure out, AI being one, but all these other areas that we want to cover.
Initially, I used it, right? And then I started to try to understand what I was using, Gmail, and how is that different from the email that was on our computer, on our desktop, and AOL or whatever it was. And it was so much more useful. I was able to, back in 2012, refinance my mortgage online instead of I had gone to the bank and I had to wait forever. And I just started to realize over time with my own experience with it, the benefits. And initially I just read about it and I read what other people were writing about it. I read books about it. I bought books. And then when I actually started writing, and then I wrote columns about it, and writing helps me learn, and then I can speak very fluently about things. So the more I write about things, and the more research I have to do for my writing, the more I learn. And then when I actually came to the point of writing a book, I interviewed experts. I interviewed people locally that are experts in cloud computing. I talked to the CEOs of the few cloud companies that were out there in the legal space back then.
When you say that, is this like what your cloud practice management, like Clio, and what you're doing at MyCase, or is there something bigger than that you're talking about?
Oh, back then it was basically Rocket Matter and Clio. And so it was Larry Ford and Jack Newton. I talked to them for my book. And then there were local people that I encountered because I founded the Social Media Club of Rochester and got to know a lot of people in the tech space locally that I also talked to about it. And again, just books and research. I've read a lot back then.
But what's interesting to me when I hear that is there's two people who really did listen to you clearly on cloud computing, and that was the founders of MyCase. And do you think, was that after you wrote the book that you had shared that with them? And to take us through that conversation, how you end up being employee number one, because I think that's probably a great story of a transformation from going from a writing career to going to be employee number one at MyCase. So I'd love to dive into that learning journey.
In 2010 was actually when I first encountered them. I was writing about the industry at that point, and as press, as media, attending conferences as media. And I wrote about them then, but I wasn't super impressed with them, to be honest, because they coined themselves as social practice management. And I think the idea was a dashboard, a Facebook stream where you could see what's going on in your firm. And I think I was the first person to write about them, or very close to it. And then I didn't really encounter them again for 2 years, again, because I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I met them in 2012. They reached out to me when I was attending Legal Tech Week at the time. It's now Legal Week as media. And I decided to meet with them, and I met with them. And I was really impressed because I realized they had a portal from day one. And like I said, I just refinanced a mortgage using one. I was really impressed with the platform in a different way than I had been before. And it was very intuitive. And I don't know if Matt Spiegel, but he's very charismatic. And he convinced me to sit through a demo, which is not my favorite thing, a couple of weeks later, a virtual demo. And it was during that conversation that My book had just been announced as coming out, and this was between Legal Week and Tech Show. And he offered to hire me to keep doing what I was doing, evangelizing the cloud. That's what I was technically hired to do, because there was a big hurdle for lawyers back then to even understand what it was, let alone trust it, as Niki with MyCase. So evangelize the cloud as Niki with MyCase. And so Tech Show was when we announced that year, like a couple weeks later that I'd been hired, right when my book was released, like a week before that show.
Got it. How has that role evolved over the past decade plus?
So my title initially was not evangelist. It was head of VP of SME and external relations or something like that. We were acquired 6 months later by Appfolio. The founder of GoToMeeting and GoToMyPC founded Appfolio after he sold those tools. And my position changed as we went into a bigger company too. I think it was director of director of, I don't even know, external relations, maybe, I can't even remember. And so initially, and then it's changed a lot over the years. And now at one point it was legal technology evangelist, and now it's principal legal insight strategist. And so initially it began more as just doing what I was doing, writing externally, speaking externally, educating lawyers. And over the years, as the way that my titles changed, I'm much more frequently being utilized internally within the company to provide expertise, sort of industry analyst knowledge almost across teams, and also even educating internally. Like I do presentations sometimes at some of our revenue kickoff event or a leadership event. And I also share what I'm writing externally, internally across teams, and provide insight about how lawyers practice and how to message to lawyers and how this feature would fit in. It just depends on who's reaching out to me for something.
To be somewhere for a dozen years plus is a big deal, especially in legal tech, especially a company that's changed hands so much. And I'm just like, how have you embraced this role as you're doing so many other things? To me, it's super fascinating because you were employee number one, and now I don't know what the last round was or how big they are, or how many employees, but that in itself is an amazing learning journey. And I just would love to share is there anything that comes to mind of like different phases of, and I don't know if you're reporting to the CEO or who you report to, but it just seems like there's so much that can be uncovered just in this component of your career.
FinPay now has, if I recall correctly, over 600 employees, and it's multiple 4 legal tech companies. And then there's a CPA Charge, which is an accounting, payment processing and billing tool. It might just be payment processing. Don't quote me on that. I don't know a lot about the accounting side of things. But, and so I used to report to the CEO, then to the president. And as the company has grown and as we've changed hands, I'm in the middle of the corporate hierarchy, which I like, thank you very much, because whenever there's a change in corporations, and there's been a lot of change across the years with MyCase, the middle is a good place to be. I'll just put it that way. But I report to Gabby Cubero, if you know her, and there's no one else I would ever want to report to because she understands the industry so well. She was the co-founder of CasePeer, which was one of the companies acquired by MyCase.
And I can imagine it's interesting because from what you write and what you share, you're on the front lines and you're sharing to the industry. And you're learning all these things that you're sharing. And I can imagine there's an internal conversation like, she can teach us how to implement AI in MyCase. She can teach us how to be more efficient in what we do. She can teach us how to be on the forefront versus just being the evangelist. Is that sort of the evolution of the role? Is just take all your expertise and actually do training internally?
I wouldn't call it training. It's more almost like an internal consultant, if you will. So I'm not in charge of training employees. I was on the original committee when we started to decide, a strategic committee almost, about AI and rolling it out from a very high level. But then when they actually started to figure out how are we going to roll this out, what's it going to look like, I wasn't involved in that because I'm not a product person. But often it's almost like one-offs. They'll reach out to me to provide some quotes for a blog post they're writing, or I oversee our legal industry report and write it. Or like someone from product will reach out with a very specific use case that they're looking at and ask me some questions about, how did you handle this in a law firm? What other lawyers, what other lawyers do? And so it's more almost like an internal consultant that provides consultancies or provides consultations, if you will, and sometimes I'll speak to other people that are running the business, not just like product or marketing too. So it just depends.
And I assume this is a part-time role, or is this a full-time? It's a full-time role.
It's been a full-time role since day one.
Got it. Which is interesting because from the outside you do so much. And that's why I'm like, how can one person do all these different things? What, how would you break down your role? Because there's speaking, there's writing, and then there's the internal component of it. And a lot of it, it's not about MyCase. A lot of it's just like you said, industry knowledge. And so, for example, your newsletter, that is for, I assume that's that's your brand, not MyCase brand, correct? This amazing newsletter that I see every week.
Correct. But so this is why I mentioned I report to Gabby, and the reason it works so well is because over the years the challenge has been to make people that don't necessarily understand the legal profession. Some leaders will come in that are not, especially as the companies grow, that are not focused on the legal profession or hired out of legal, right? They know how to run companies. Is to make them understand the value. And now I feel like once we were acquired by AffiniPay, it's a very comfortable place to be now because they already understood the legal industry and they have a lot of people internally that do. So they knew me coming in. They understood the reach I have in the industry, how I'm a trusted expert. I've always walked this very fine line of trying to, as best I can and as naturally as I can, get our company's name out there, get our company's products, announcements, but provide expertise so that people trust me and provide neutral expertise. And so that has been something that I have hung my hat on over the years throughout all of the change that's happened, because I'm unwilling to become a mouthpiece for the company because that's not where I excel, and that's not ultimately doesn't bring the company the value that I bring. A much greater value doing what I do. And I know I can see you're like, how does the newsletter reaches 27,000 people? They tune in. And I started it in mid-November, by the way. So that shows you how many people listen.
So it was zero and literally zero.
I launched it mid-November.
Congratulations.
But thanks. But that means these people are interested in what I'm saying. And so I do have a legal industry news section, and where I put other people's news up there. But whenever we have an announcement, I'll put it up there. You know what I mean? And totally. I talked about our conference in a recent one, but I don't do it a lot. But when we need to get stuff out there in an interesting way, I do it.
That's, I don't know. I just, from working for 20 years now and being an entrepreneur for most of that time and being part of YPO and an entrepreneurs organization and being around a lot of entrepreneurs, this is a very unique, I've actually haven't heard, maybe it's more common than I think, but it feels like a very unique role, and where it looks like you're able to live your passion with authenticity about the industry that you know and keep growing there without having to constantly push one message to be your authentic self. But MyCase is doing great things too, and in those messages you can share what's going on there. So I think, I don't know, I got chills when you were saying that, because I don't think most people have that sort of that mix, and I think it takes probably a lot of hard work and a lot of challenges to get that. Is that right, the way I'm summing that up?
Yeah. The other thing I would say is it's also MyCase, CasePeer, DocuWise, LawPay. It's all of our legal brands that I now represent in the marketplace. But the other thing I would say is first of all, Guy Kawasaki is a similar role, but for tech in general, for example. But one thing I do want to say is, you said you do all this stuff. How do you have the time? Part of the reason I have the time is because over the years, the different people that I reported to and that have been leaders of the companies have realized that leave me to do my thing without a lot of process or interference, and I can get a lot more done than if you start having me on a team where people are saying, we need to focus on this, and then you start getting involved in the process of the company, which as the company grows becomes very complex to have processes in place that work together and are effective for the teams. But once you start adding teams, it does add complexity to it. And so I am part of teams, but I also am often allowed to just do my own thing, but I am involved in enough so I know all the themes at a high level. I'm part of the leadership team, so I know all the themes. I know the things we're emphasizing from a strategic business perspective, and I also can often bring those out in my writing as well when I'm trying to influence, if you will, how lawyers think about tech and how they think about the technology that we sell, even though I'm not always talking about our products.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. And obviously ChatGPT and any AI tool, Claude, and those things have been helpful. And I know you mentioned it in a podcast that I listened to in your weekly newsletter. You write it, but you then have, I don't know which one it was, let's say ChatGPT, help make it more playful and funnier and add the hook, correct? Like it helps you simplify, it helps you do it in 2 hours versus 8 hours and when you write something, correct?
Sure, but I would flip it on its head a little bit. I actually rely on it more than you're suggesting, especially for that newsletter. I curate all the content. I decide what I want to write about, what I want to include, the points I want to hit on. But then I ask ChatGPT to actually, and it still takes 2 hours to create this thing. But I asked ChatGPT, all right, now we're going to do this section. I just did it for today's. This is what it looked like last time. I want that snark, I want that wit, and I want to emphasize this point. Here's a link to the article, draft it. And then I'll spend 10 minutes revising it, editing it, telling it to change it, and then I'll type it in differently ultimately. So that's one of the few things where I really do rely incredibly heavily on it, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to do that newsletter at scale the way I do.
Do you have anyone? I totally appreciate what you're saying about not being part of a team, because then there's meetings, and then there's people who can't keep up, or there's people who just want to challenge, or whatever it is. Do you have a team or any individuals that you were able to delegate to, or is ChatGPT and AI really taking a brunt of the load that you had to do before?
So I am on a team, I'm on the marketing team. And so, for example, when we do the legal industry report, while I'm considered an individual contributor in the corporate context, so I don't have anyone that I manage. But when we do that industry report, there's the creative team, there's the campaigns team, there's the content team. And I work with all of them once I create the draft. I talk to them ahead of time to get some themes and ideas from what they think they might need out of it. But then I have the individual control to write what I think I really want to focus on. And then I get a ton of input from them after they read the report. And then the content team edits it. The creative team formats it and designs it. And again, the campaigns team helps to make sure that they also review the whole thing. So it does get delegation in that way. Like once I do the content, I'm not responsible for making it look the way it looks and pulling it together. It's definitely a huge team effort. So I do work with lots of other people on projects.
And you were talking about the report. You guys recently started putting out a report that's similar in a way to the Legal Trends report. Is that correct? From Clio.
Yeah, the AffiniPay Legal Industry Report. We started it when MyCase was in 2020. MyCase was acquired out of AffiniPay and was a standalone company for 2 years. And that's when we acquired CasePeer and DocketWise and a couple of other companies. And that's when we started the MyCase Legal Industry Report. So when AffiniPay acquired MyCase and the companies it had acquired in June 2022, it became the Legal Industry Report. So this was the 4th year that I've ran the survey. And by the way, running the survey, that's our email team. So this was they helped me, and someone else helped me pull the survey together. I write it, but it's very much a team effort to make it. It's a beautiful report, I think. It's a wonderful report, really useful, and it came out so wonderful this year. So it's 100% a team effort, but it's our 4th year to answer your question that we've had this report. And it's similar, but different.
How often is in things that you do or in the company is Clio in the conversation? They're the 300-pound gorilla, and they've been that for a while.
Well, listen, we have multiple competitors across all the different products. Of course, Clio is part of the conversation because they are a competitor. CasePeer has multiple competitors across the personal injury space. And quite frankly, general practice management is a competitor for them. DocketWise is immigration, and they have competitors across the immigration space. And general practice management software is also a competitor, if you will. But that's where we differentiate ourselves in the market. Of course, we talk about Clio, we talk about all the other competitors, but what we are is ultimately, no matter what type of practice you're trying to run, we can handle everything from start to finish, even for specific practice areas, from intake to getting paid. And in a compliant way, LawPay has been doing payments for, I think it's 20 years. They just celebrated 20 years of LawPay and AffiniPay. And they've been doing payments for lawyers for 20 years. They know how it's compliant. They know the work processes, the workflow. They know the legal tech industry. That's why I'm so happy to be there in the AffiniPay space, in the AffiniPay company. They understand legal tech, which is what I understand.
Well, and in a way, like things accelerated significantly for Clio when they got into the payment space as well. When I think they had the partnership with LawPay for a while, and then
they still do have a partnership with LawPay.
Okay, you know where they're big. So have you guys ever thought? And I'm going to move on. This is my last question about MyCase. I appreciate you diving into this because I don't know. I think it's super interesting. I think you have a great role there, and maybe it will inspire others or be educational for others who are trying to navigate their growth in how they can have an impact in legal tech as a lawyer who wants to transition to different areas. And I think you've shown a great example. Do you guys have you ever thought, or maybe you do, and I don't know about it, do any user conferences for MyCase?
I love that question. In September, we're having the first ever AffiniPay conference. It's called Kaleidoscope, and it's for legal and accounting professionals. And we've got some great people. We haven't announced them yet that we have lined up to speak. And we already have the agendas up, and we're super excited about it. And it's going to be in Austin, which is
Awesome. In September, you said?
Yeah, September 22nd to the 24th.
Wow. And I love that. I love that. That's because it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense for different things. As a side note, we've expanded our product offering. So we have something called Lawline Concierge, and we have partnered with several conferences, Legal Geek being one, Legal Tech Hub being another, where we're actually accrediting their conferences and doing some cool things by hosting some of the platforms. So if you're ever interested, we could talk.
All right, sure, I'll definitely pass that along.
Cool. And was that something that came, were you the catalyst of that? Or is there a lot of people who are like, let's make that happen?
We have a new CMO. Nate he joined, I want to say in October or November, and he has definitely been the catalyst behind, let's get this conference off the ground and let's get it going now. He's really excited about it, Nate Skinner. And I think conferences are a huge lift, and it's a ton of work, but there's a huge payoff. It brings a ton of value to the industry, and we can't wait to bring this to the lawyers and accountants that attend.
How many attendees do you want to be at the first one?
The first one, we're capping it at 250 to make it an exclusive experience and to make sure that we're really able to, for our first conference, do it right and do it the way that they would expect it to be.
I know a lot of these conferences you hear for the first couple of years or for a long time, you either barely break even or you lose some money, or it depends on how much the sponsorship angle is. It's a multi-year commitment. That's always, like you said, there's a huge lift. Is this an experiment for year one? Or are you guys really thinking, obviously you want to build something out in 3-5 years where there's 1,000 people, I assume, that it can be industry standard?
As far as this is not an experiment, we're all in on this, and we have a ton of partnerships, a ton of different companies that integrate with our products. And so we already have a lineup of exhibitors from across the board from all of our different partners that are going to be there, that our goals are not to lose any money on this, but our goals are to ultimately just provide the best conference we possibly can.
And I love the mix between law and accounting. I don't know if I know of any other legal tech conference that is purposely focused on those two professions.
AffiniPay is a vertical company, meaning AffiniPay,
Sure.
It is the way that what AffiniPay's plan is, goal is, and what we do is provide software and payment tools to help businesses, professional businesses,
Sure,
their business. And so law is the one where they are the most invested in at this point. We have CPA charge, which is for accountants. And then the plan is to continue to build on the accountant vertical and then ultimately roll out into another vertical that is a professional services, something like possibly architects or something like that. I don't think that vertical hasn't yet been determined.
Yeah,
but
totally.
That's the plan and how.
Well, law and accounting is the two areas Lawline's in, and I've always had the dream of wanting to do a conference in some form, but I haven't yet for many different reasons that are obvious to why you're doing it. But like I said, I know it's late in the game, but if there's any way I can contribute or Lawline can be of help, maybe I can live my dream in working with you guys somehow. I'm serious about that. Yeah, so you never know.
If you can send me an email afterwards, you can let me know.
Yeah, this is on air now, so whoever hears this was going. So did you guys do that? So let's move to you in the last few minutes or so, because there's a couple of really interesting stories that I think it's worth repeating, even though you probably shared them several times. So when you were on LinkedIn originally, and when did things explode or accelerate, if they did, at a certain period from your followers? Because you probably have the most followed account in legal tech that I can think of from anyone I know. And so certainly would love to understand that story.
So LinkedIn is interesting, right? The book that Carolyn Elephant and I wrote in 2010, Social Media for Lawyers, LinkedIn was almost like an afterthought. It was just your online resume. Nobody really interacted. And then, but I always tried to, I want to say probably in about 2015 or 16, when Twitter started to change and everyone was moving to Facebook, which was interesting. A lot of lawyers were actually professionally interacting on Facebook. I looked at LinkedIn again, and I would cross post some of my other posts from other places to LinkedIn, but I still wasn't quite sure what to do with it. But I did try to, I want to say around that time, I can't, I'd have to go back and look, but I was trying to do more with LinkedIn, and not many people were at the time, especially not in legal tech. And at some point, I got a direct message from someone from LinkedIn who said, we are starting to expand our mobile app, and would it be okay if we featured you as somebody to follow in law? Like, it was a pretty broad category, just in law. I'm like, sure, go ahead. Like, why am I going to say no to that? So that's when I gained a ton of followers from all across the world. They're just not just US, it's like India and
Do you know how many you gained at that? Was that like 100,000 followers?
a lot. Yeah. I mean, it was a lot, a lot
Wow.
just from that exposure. But quite honestly, my LinkedIn presence, it wasn't until about 3 years ago that I did much with it at all.
Yeah.
That's when I really went all in, because I stopped. Twitter just was not serving my purposes, less for political reasons and more just because so many people were on it that it was hard for anyone to see.
Yeah.
Everyone was overwhelmed by the input almost. And Facebook was devolving too. And so I just stopped using those and just went all in on LinkedIn, especially because, quite frankly, other people from the company are on there as well. And more lawyers were
Yeah.
showing up
It's
there.
been transformational for many people.
Yeah, so I've just spent more and more time on LinkedIn and figuring out how to use it, how to reach people, how to do what I do best there, share information. And it's really been in the last year and a half that I've really increased my interaction and
Yeah.
the newsletter and stuff. So I've built that presence up, but it took a couple of years since I actually gained all those followers to do anything with it.
Look, there's consistency. They always say consistency is key. It's like content and consistency, or there's a depending on, obviously you need good content, but it needs to be consistent. And
Yeah.
you said in November, you started with this newsletter that, as you shared how ChatGPT is helping you. Is there, and I actually haven't even read it yet. I saw there was a good recommendation of a post from the podcast you're on how to build up your newsletter. What have you learned? So if I'm a lawyer or somebody in legal tech, and I am one of those people who have not started a newsletter, what have you learned that to help me? Because I think I'm going to follow in your footsteps and try to put out some content on a regular, consistent basis. Is there 3 to 5 tips that are unique to your experiences, or one tip that would be helpful for me?
I have a couple. The first one would be, if you start a LinkedIn newsletter versus a newsletter somewhere else that you then share on LinkedIn, your numbers are public. So keep that in mind. I don't think that I fully understood that or thought about it when I launched it. Fortunately, a lot of people signed up, but if they didn't, I from an optics probably wouldn't have been great. So think that through. And then,
But is there anything to do about that, or you're just saying just be aware?
be aware
that,
before
yeah.
you.
But
because
it's fine for me because I don't have your following, so I got no ego there. I was like, if I got 100 people, that's great. So yeah,
it's ego, and it's just more optics, right? What if I
Yeah.
had 200 followers? You'd be like, I don't know who those 200,000 people following are, but only
Yeah.
200 likers.
No, it's such an interesting point because everybody has to start at 0. And so what you say right there is enough to prevent probably 50% more people to never start because
Well,
of
you can
that.
start a newsletter on Substack and share it on LinkedIn, and you still get the same benefit in some ways, except that when you share it on LinkedIn, they will put it in front of more people's eyes. They put it in a
Of
new
course.
email, so you get those benefits. So those are the benefits. And then what I would suggest is, I do think that if you make it lighthearted, but you're still sharing really useful information, that helps, rather than, because newsletters are a dime a dozen. You got to think of something that's going to make it stand out and be entertaining, and people want to keep coming back. And then also find ways to encourage interaction in the comments, because that's part of what people come back for. Is there's a lot of discussion in the comments
Yeah.
to the post on LinkedIn,
And I
it's
think,
fun to people too when they comment.
does every newsletter get emailed to all your subscribers, or is it, do you know, or is there an algorithm where only a certain percentage get emailed? Because I know some of them do get emailed out for LinkedIn.
I don't think it goes to everybody, but it goes to, I have a lot of people that follow me, so it goes to
Yeah.
a lot of people. But it also tells you there's analytics like the open rates and the number of
Yeah.
people who saw it online, who saw it in their mailboxes, in the email boxes, but inboxes. But I also just think it's another way to create content that is interesting,
Yeah.
that's useful. You can include links in it, which you don't get penalized for like you do with LinkedIn posts. So that's
Yeah, I saw that.
about it.
I have, like, consistency, like I use the don't break the chain methodology, which I learned from a quote Seinfeld gave. Like when you're learning a new joke, when you're a young comedian, instead of writing one day for all your jokes, do one joke a day and keep doing that. So I do every weekday one LinkedIn post. And I generally actually think about it in the morning based on my own life experiences. So it's more like insights in life versus like legal tech. And what I love about that, it forces me to be creative in that moment and think about what is happening that's interesting that other will get values from. How do you, on a week by week basis, and you have it many different sections, what are your strategies to have so much material to put out there? And are you also like sometimes, I don't know what to write today. I don't know what to do. How do I, okay, let me see what the recent news is. Let me put that. Okay, let me try to connect the dots here. And you're just struggling a little bit more than you want people to know, because it's a lot to do that every week.
First of all, I love your LinkedIn presence. I think it's very genuine, and you can tell that it's something that you think about, that it's coming from you. And what you touched on is part of what helps make you aren't like planning a way out ahead of time. You're talking about things that are on your mind right now. And I think that's often a great way to interact on social media that will come off as genuine, because it is genuine. It's actually what's on your mind. It's what you're thinking about, what you're mulling over. And it's easier to write. And when it's something that you're mulling over anyway, it comes out a lot more easily. And it's also a way that allows, when you do it that way and you're not planning and you're able to have a more genuine presence that's interesting. I think that's important. And then in terms of what I do, I have a whole routine in the morning where I start by seeing what everyone else is saying. Then I go through my RSS feed and read what everybody's writing in the space and in tech in general. And then I always have something in mind that I'm going to share on LinkedIn. I do that at first, whether it's a post I just wrote, a podcast I was just on, every once in a while thoughts or something. Like sometimes I do have ones like that, or a personal thing every once in a while. But the whole morning routine helps me. I save content that I think I might want to include in the newsletter as I go through my RSS feed. I save to read later. So at the end of the week on a Friday, I have 30 things saved that caught my eye that kind of fall under different categories. And it's just a way that I can see the big picture of what's happening across our industry and tech in general. And then also things that give me ideas about what to write, because I do create a lot of content writing and speaking. So that morning routine takes up a decent amount of time, but it's the heart of everything else that I do.
I'm a huge fan of morning routines, so I appreciate that. I also journal, and to some degree, for better or worse, I use LinkedIn as an external journal. And I guess Zoom approves right now because it's giving me a thumbs up. And from those journals, then you're able to do it. The earlier, the better. I don't know if you feel the same way. From 6 till 11 a.m. is my time though, not for you.
Definitely not 6.
Okay. No, 6 if I'm able to get up at 6, if I go to bed early, but whenever I wake up early enough to have that energy. There was 2 other questions so the consistency. So you're doing this call very shortly with about 6 people or so, depending on the week. Yeah. So are you able to take the content that you've already done for the newsletter and everything else and really essentially use that in that podcast? Or are you coming up with even new content to share with there? I assume you're synergizing what's interesting this week based on the things that you've already put together.
Bob has a spreadsheet that he shares with all of us on Thursdays that we all enter the 1 or 2 things we want to talk about. Often it's an article that one of us that we've already written. We usually will include something we've each written that week. And then sometimes we'll throw in something that caught our eye that's just a news item. And sometimes there's just themes that crop up. Like I guarantee today we're going to talk about ChatGPT errors, because there have been so many announced this week and last week and the week before, and that's definitely a big theme that keeps happening. And we have a Slack chat that I created that we all connect on to, but that's more just sharing stories as they come up, and sometimes one of us will use that story and write about it. So it's a combination of the Slack chat, but most of it's just us entering things we've written about that we've all been thinking about and that are trending, because that's what we all do. We're all sort of legal tech journalists.
I love that. I love that group you guys have. I love that there's a Slack group. I love that you're supporting each other, and then you're also then sharing. That's a really important learning and growth areas, to have like-minded individuals who you can get easy access to. Again, Slack being one of them. So if anybody who watches that, know that it's not like they just show up at the meeting. They have Excel sheets, they have Slacks, and there's a lot of preparation ahead of time. Last 2 questions. I like to ask what books have influenced your career that you've read. And then the second question is, what books most recently have been influential? And sometimes I like to give you a moment, because sometimes people actually get their phone and look at their Kindle list or their Audible or wherever they do it, because sometimes it's hard to come up with what's recent or whatever, but I didn't know if there's anything top of mind, because one of my goals is to compile all these books through using Claude and ChatGPT and create my own industry. Like out of these interviews, there's so much there, but it's hard for someone to watch necessarily 50 hours of content. But if I can get the books and the podcast and some of the really insights in there. So this will be hopefully helpful if you have a couple you can share.
So the one that immediately comes to mind, and it might be a little cliche, but Richard Susskind's The Future of Lawyers, 100% was really influential for me. I was a little bit of a Richard Susskind fangirl, if you will, because he was speaking in Toronto at one point, very early on in my career, and I just registered for the conference. I think I got a press pass because I was getting press passes at that point, and drove to Toronto. And so a conversation I had with him after his talk set me on the career path I'm on. I don't know if he knows this. I don't
Wow.
talk to him often, but we know each other. But I just told him I really enjoy what you do, and I think it just really resonates. And he said, I see what you're trying to do. He goes, I don't think you're going to be able to do what you're trying to do unless you write some books. He's like, you need to write books because that's what makes you an expert, and you are asked to speak more often. And you need to write books. And so that's why when Carolyn reached out to me shortly thereafter, we were friends at that point, and we just met each other in person. But said, I'm under a deadline, and can you help write this book with me? And so that's how I ended up with the Social Media for Lawyers book. And then I pitched the cloud book to my editor once I had one at the ABA. But I think that my life career would have been very different if I hadn't written books and it just continued writing articles and stuff. So that was, not only was that book very influential, but his very short piece of advice that he gave me after his talk was super influential. And then the book that I have that's legal tech related on my nightstand, coincidentally, just arrived in the mail, and it's his book because it just came out. It's How to Understand AI or something like that. It's a book that just came out that's not just targeted at lawyers. It's a general book, but I'd read somebody else's review of it, and there were some sections that sounded super interesting. So I just bought it. I didn't ask him. I probably could have gotten a review copy, but I didn't even bother reaching out to ask him. I just bought it. But so I have that along with lots of wine books because I love wine. Those are the two things that are on my nightstand right now.
I love that. As you were telling that story, I'm like, this will be a clip for social media because that's a perfect story. To me, that is the law of attraction to the T. And that's why when you mentioned you're doing a conference, it's been a conversation internally of what we're trying to do. And to me, that's the law of attraction. I'm like, whether it turns into anything or not, my job is to tell you we're interested in helping if there's a value. Because when you put things out in the world and other people, and you hear somebody say something that it's what you're talking about, your job is to attract to that and to put it out there. And what a great story. And I hope I will tag him to that clip, and I hope that he does see that. I saw him speak at the Legal Tech Fund Summit. I don't know if you were and that when he was if summit, it was in Miami, and he's just gave some great one-liners. And so hopefully I'll have him on this sooner than later. I have Jordan Furlong coming on soon, so that should be good. Bob Ambrosi said he would do it, but then he started getting too busy. So if you see him or talk to him in maybe an hour and 10 minutes, tell him I still want him on, because I think he has such a great story to tell, obviously. And I would love to have that there as well. Any podcasts that you want to mention?
I don't listen to podcasts.
Got it.
I have a hard time just listening to things for some reason.
Okay.
So there are not any podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis. I'll listen to them on one-off basis. There's an episode that sounds interesting, but
yeah, no, for me, like podcasts or books, the fact that you're able to drive and listen, like there's something about driving and listening to something, especially if it's a beautiful scenery outside, it works well. But
I'm lucky enough to work remotely. I have since 2012. So ever since the pandemic in particular, I get up, I walk downstairs, I work, and that's it. There's no driving.
Sarah Blakely from Spanx used to say because maybe she was working from home too, or she'd be at the office, when she ever wanted to come up with a big idea or she had to think something through, she would just literally get in the car and drive for 2 hours, even though she didn't have to. And that's where things would help. Like she probably didn't live in Brooklyn and dealing with all that traffic. She was in Atlanta, but it was nice. So I don't know. I really appreciate your time, Niki. You have a full week, you have a full day. I am honored that you wanted to be on the podcast, and I hope to see you sooner than later at an upcoming conference.
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.